We'll be starting off this new video in a new playlist, intermediate programming with Rust, and this video will be talking about basic functions. So before we talk about that, let's talk about what functions are. First of all, functions are just a bunch of procedures, right? Or let's say a procedure to carry out some task. And we have, for example, our bodies that have different parts, and these different parts, for example, the mouth talks like I'm doing right now. And the fact that the mouth can talk, talking itself is a function, and it has a starting point. There is something I want to say, and there is my tongue and teeth and my lips moving, and there is whatever I'm saying coming out, sound waves, right? Vibrations in the air. So that itself is your body carrying out a function, which is to talk. And you can express functions in Rust using what we're going to do right now. So far we have been using this main function, and we keep saying main function. Now we are going to say that this is the most important function in Rust because we consider it an entry point for our program. More about that later. So to create a function in Rust, we use the fn keyword like we have been using with the main function, and then we give the function name, example function, right? Let's call this example function 1. And then we give this open and close brackets like here, and we give the function a body in braces. So with this example function, we are going to be printing hello example function, right? Now with that, let's run this program and see how this function works. Okay, now as we did not expect, the hello example function doesn't get printed. All that we have is hello world. Now what we have just done is we have created example function. In other words, we have defined the function example function 1. And that's not all about working with functions in Rust, or basically the next thing we need to do is to call this function or invoke it. And by invoking, we mean writing the function name example function with the open and close brackets after that. So when you do this, what you have done is you have invoked this function in main. And what happens here is that everything that this function does is going to be carried out in the main function. And because that happens, right, we can now run this program and we'll see that hello example function gets printed. Now, anytime you want your functions to work, they need to either be in the main function or they need to be in a function that is in the main function. In other words, they need to have the main function as the root caller. What do I mean by that? Let's create another function fn example function 2. And what this function does is no, let's not print. Let's do a for loop for I in 1 to 11 print, right? Print I. So with this we can call example function 2 here, and if we run this, we'll see that it prints 1 to 10. Okay, or excuse me, we can call example function 2 here. Because we invoke it here, or because we call it here, this function 1 gets called in the main function. So what happens is it's going to print hello world, it's going to invoke this, and when it invokes this, it's going to print hello example function, and then it's going to run or invoke example function 2, and when it does this, we're going to have this invoked too. We're going to have this running too. So let's run that and see what happens. Hello example function 1 to 3 up to 10. Okay, so with that we see that no matter how many functions we write, let's create another one, example function 3, and then we say let's print again this time, whatever that is, and we invoke this in example function 2. We'll see that this is still going to get printed, and that's because for all of these, the root caller or the root function invoking it is the function main. So let's run this. We're going to see that whatever we wrote gets printed. Okay. So now the next thing we're going to be looking at is we'll just talk a bit on how we should be giving names to these functions. I give the names example function 1, example function 2 because that's what they are, right? But most of the time when we are creating functions, the function names have to define or have to explain what they do. Print a greeting. So by seeing this name, we know that the expectation of this function is that it should print a greeting. Maybe hello, good afternoon. That's an example, right? And that's all it does. You could have a function that adds 7 numbers. You could say some 7 numbers, whatever. But all you just need to know is when you're giving your function names, they should describe what the function does in best case scenarios. And the function name should be in such a way that you have an underscore separating each word in the function name. So you know that if we call this print a greeting here, what we can do is we can run this and we'll see that hello good afternoon gets printed. Now I think that so far we have seen the basics of functions in Rust. We have seen how we can create functions, we have seen how we can invoke them, and the last thing we're going to look at is we do not necessarily have to introduce a certain order when creating these functions, like with variables. You'll see that when you're creating a variable, for example, let a equals 3, you cannot come before a and try to use it in this print statement, for example, and provide a here. That will not work, and that's because a has not been defined. Can't find a in this scope. That's because a needs to be before it is used, right? We're no longer going to have this error. But for a function, what you must do is, or you must not have the function before it is used. If you notice, we have even declared, or we have defined these functions way after the main function, and we've been using them in here. So there's no order for which you can define your function. Another thing you also need to know is that you can define a function in a function. For example, print a name. Print a name, all we can just do is come here and call print a name, right? Once we run this program, error can you gets printed as expected. So that is how functions work in Rust, basically. Now in the later videos, we're going to be talking more about functions. Thank you very much for following up, guys. See you next.